We're co-hosting this tent with Agricology, just next door, and this session is about agricultural education. And tomorrow we've got a session on agricultural research and farmer research priorities. So, what should you learn when you study agriculture, including about regenerative agriculture, and also how can we make the experience of doing that as forward-looking and as relevant to what people end up doing in practice as possible? So those are the kind of things we've been thinking about and we'll talk about in this session. And part of the prompt for it was being here last year. I was very struck by a conversation with a student who was talking about how they hadn't had any of this, what we're seeing at Groundswell in their degree course so far. And I guess, I was wondering, how universal is that experience? Is that the case if you study agriculture in the UK, or is it a one-off? And so it sort of set us going on a path as a group of universities to think on how we could do a bit of a systematic look at some of those issues. So we've done a lot since this time last year. One of the things we did was last July, we got together nearly all the degree program leads, so the people overall responsible for agriculture degree programs at the different universities, for a few days, and then invited 30 outside organisations that work with farmers to come and hand over very kindly on a plate lots of fantastic resources like videos and farmer case studies and so on that people could use straight away in their teaching without having to do anything slow and bureaucratic to do with changing curricula or anything like that. They could just use this stuff straight away. So that worked really well. And then all that material is now shared for anyone to use on Farm Pep. So all the materials that people pulled together for us as a group of lecturers are there for others to use, potentially in other countries as well, and open source. In September, we then checked in with the group who'd been at that retreat and asked how it was going, and quite a lot of people already, not everybody, quite a lot of people were already using material from that session in the summer in their teaching and planned how to use it for this year now, which is great. But we also then resolved to take a more systematic look at what people are doing. So that was like quick fix stuff. But we also thought it would be worth taking a more kind of empirical look at what was being taught across the sector, how we were doing, and where might the gaps be, and also where are the things where we're all doing the same stuff, and maybe many hands could make light work. So thanks to funding from the Aurora Trust, we have not only been doing that piece of work, which we'll talk about in a moment, but also very happy that we've been able to bring 100 of the people who are doing the teaching, so lecturers from across universities right across the UK, to Groundswell now, and hopefully lots of you in the room, in the tent now, and staying on for the drinks to chat to people. So that's been great, and that's very much a product of those conversations where the program leads got together last summer and said, wouldn't it be great if we could do this not just as course directors, if you like, but also with all our colleagues who are doing, teaching the different modules and so forth. So that is partly what we're doing here. So. What we're going to do now is hear from two speakers. So first, my colleague Kayleigh Crouch, who is from the Centre for Effective Innovation in Agriculture, is going to talk through the module mapping that we've been doing. And so that's looking at what not necessarily what's being taught, but what we say we're going to teach. So what's down in the curriculum, which isn't doesn't the sum total of everything that people will be learning, but is the stuff we're sort of committing to in our degree programs to be delivering. And so we've gone and gathered together lots of that with lots of help from people in the room, and then tried to look for where the patterns are. So where are the overlaps? Where are the gaps? What are people doing that's new and interesting? What are the things that we're maybe neglecting a little bit collectively? So that's one piece of work. And then Liz Lawrenson from Landex will talk about what the land-based colleges are doing. So the colleges in further education work a bit differently in terms of how the curriculum operates from universities and higher education. So we'll get a picture of how colleges are dealing with regenerative agriculture, but also in general, if you're interested in shaping the curriculum for further education, how would you go about contributing to that process? So we'll hear from both of them, and then we'll have a chat together. Particularly interested in the next phase of the work that we're doing. Kayleigh and I are involved in working out where to spend. If we've got some budget to put into some joint module development for people from any of the universities in this group, and trying to find out where the interest is in doing something together, who's interested in doing something, got a bit of time, if it's funded, to do some joint model development and do that as a bit of a pilot. So we'll have a bit of that conversation. Anything else you want to talk about? And then at 6:30, this will change from a lecture theatre into a party tent, and we'll crack open the cider and the beer and the juice that's at the back there, and it will be, there should be about 20 universities, I think, represented here, and there'll be a chance to chat to them and chat to each other and so forth. So that's the plan. Over to Kayleigh.
Thanks, Tom. I think that's working. So yeah, as Tom said, I'm Kay and I work for the Centre for Effective Innovation in Agriculture. And as part of my role there, I'm involved in some of the Agricultural University Council's project. And the one that I'm going to talk about today is Rethinking Agricultural Education. So just to add to some of that background that Tom just gave, there was the AUC retreat last summer that brought together programme leads to discuss agricultural education with industry partners as well. They agreed to form a teaching and learning group, which many of you will know, to progress some collaborative work. And priorities from this included comparing programme structures and modules across the sector. So looking at what's being covered, how it's being covered, and how this teaching can frame future learning or engagement. The idea is to provide a platform to share best practice and progress collaborative work. So the process involved collating 283 undergraduate modules, which were kindly shared by 11 institutions. And the idea was to highlight common modules shared across the sector, novel modules, and alternative framings. It's worth noting that not everybody could share postgraduate modules across all institutions, so they're not included in the stuff that I'm going to talk about today. And it's also worth noting that there were some universities that couldn't share specific module details. It was just the programme overviews. So we had some information on the level at which they were taught and the titles, but not much beyond that. But where possible, we extracted key module content, learning outcomes, assessment methods, and the levels at which they were taught. And the idea here is to share key insights from the analysis and encourage collaboration, and hopefully reduce duplication of effort where possible. In the spirit of reducing duplication of effort, we want to think about how we move forward with piloting a shared module. But there's also some other questions that would be useful to bear in mind as I move through the following slides. So what else can we learn from this? We've gathered this information and this data. What are the key questions that we need to be asking of it to really make the most of it? Have we missed anything? So, for example, we don't have undergraduate dissertation modules for every university. So is that the case that not everyone requires it? Or is it that we've just got gaps in our data? And then where are joint module efforts best focused? So 11 universities provided modules across a range of programmes, and these ranged from core programmes focusing on livestock, crops, business and tech, but they also included things like countryside management, food business management, and ecosystem management. It's also worth noting that we're aware that there are lots of innovative offerings coming through, particularly at postgraduate level as well, and those are things that would be useful to discuss at Groundswell and then during the party event later. So we're interested in how best to equip people going into the agricultural sector. It was thought that there would be value in terms of holding up a mirror to the sector and looking at what's being covered. I'm going to talk through the visualization that you can see hopefully today. And this is a reflection of the amount of modules that were shared. It's in no way an indication of importance. What we're looking at really is, in a way, how much teaching material there is and how many potentially options there are to students studying agriculture. So there were sort of 58 topics, and to be able to share this with you today, we read the module details and were able to group them into those 58 topics and then further group them into the 9 overall themes, which you can see here. So the first one, or the biggest one, is agribusiness management. Then there are the sciences that often focus on production. Skills, which are often split between industry and employability skills, but also skills required to complete an agricultural degree. And then perhaps reassuring to show that there's a nice spread of other modules that focus on environment, sustainability, agri-tech, social science and policy. And just to reiterate that point as well, that this is not a reflection of the importance of modules, but of groups, but actually it's just a reflection on the amount of information that was shared, being that dissertation is the smallest here, but we're also aware that it's generally quite fundamental to undergraduate degrees. And then here are the details of those 58 topics that I just mentioned under those overall umbrellas. And we'll share this at a later date, so hopefully you can explore it in your own time and look at the details. But just to pull out sort of the key pillars, agribusiness management included topics like broad farm business management through to supply chains. Plant science covered information on broad plant science through to agronomy, crops and horticulture. And then animal science sometimes had broad animal science, and then sometimes with a sort of lean towards veterinary focus and livestock production. It's also worth pulling out some of the other information around social science and policy. So there were some modules relating to food security and consumer behaviour. And then with technology, there were sort of broad agri-technology modules, but there were also some specific technology focuses on livestock, soil, and crops. And then we wanted to have a focus on some of the environmental themes that I didn't touch on just now. So you can see in the yellow that there's the environment overall theme, and in the mint there's the sustainability theme. But we also wanted to see where these crop up across other modules and other groupings too for interest. So I'm going to pull out some of the key overlaps in a moment, but just before I do it, it's worth distinguishing between some of the terms on the side. So regenerative agriculture was often referred to within module specs as preserving land for longevity and often using innovative ways to do so, whilst agroecology often focused on biodiversity among wildlife, plants. It looked at One Health approaches and also principles grounded within nutrition. So we ran some key search terms to identify where, if there was any overlap. And we can see that regenerative agriculture with the pink dot appeared once within environment, but actually there was an overlap with 5 other groupings. Agroecology had 6 modules, but actually there was an overlap with 4 other groupings, sort of ranged from developments in crop science through to technology. Agroforestry, which is the little blue circle, had 2 modules, but actually overlapped with other groupings, including farming systems and soil and land management. And then finally, nature and natural capital appeared in farm business management. So we can see that these topics are gradually emerging within agricultural degrees, and it's promising to see that they're overlapping across different groups as well. Whilst it's reassuring to see that these do crop up, it's worth noting that they appear to be cropping up within a subset of universities, so 4 out of the 11. It is worth noting, actually, though, the caveat to that is that, as Tom said, we're looking at module specs, we're looking at the details that we were able to review. So it may be that lecturers are covering this content within their sessions and we just can't see it in the module specs. It's also worth noting when we ran those keyword searches that we didn't have complete module details for every module, so there will be universities that just won't have cropped up within those searches as well. And then we just wanted to show you the sort of spread of the different modules that were included or shared with us. So if we look at the y-axis, we're looking at the depth at which modules were taught, so across how many different levels, looking at a level index that we'd attributed to those modules to sort of show the spread. And then across the x-axis, we're looking at the breadth of modules, so across how many universities are these modules taught at. So for example, you can see that soil and land management is widely shared across 9 universities and covered across multiple different levels, whilst all plant science is taught at 1 university at various different levels. And then just to pull out the most commonly taught modules, so we're looking at developing sustainable systems, farm business management, and soil and land management. And generally, it seems that regardless of what students choose to study or where they choose to study, it's possible that they might encompass these core principles within their agricultural degrees. Other environmental topics are worth pulling out too. So we know that soil and land management was one of the most widely shared ones, but ecology and conservation was really focused on in 1 university with 4 modules across multiple years. Introduction to Regen was taught at 1 university. Ecosystems was taught at 2 universities, and then agroecology was slightly more spread out, so taught across 3 universities with 2 modules each, all taught at later stages of the degree. And then some other interesting topics to pull out here too. So how to manage a sustainable business through economics was covered, global markets and production was covered, technology and innovation, and food security. And these were some of the sort of central areas within the matrix that we thought would be useful to sort of draw your eye to as well. So we have some budget to support joint development of a shared module, and we'll also find out shortly if we will have some funding to create more open resources that can be used by everyone. But what we wanted to talk to you about today was, where is this effort best placed in terms of focusing on developing that shared module? Do we want to look at topics that are widely covered to include a best of approach? So we'd be looking at skills development for agriculture, soil and land management, or farm business management. Do we want to look at topics that few of us cover, but actually we think might be useful to consider rolling out? So we'd be looking at regen, agroforestry, or agroecology. Or do we want to look at something completely new and not yet taught across universities that's sort of coming down the track? So these are just some pointers sort of bearing those other questions in mind as we move into the discussion after Liz's talk. It would be really nice to talk about whether these interpretations feel accurate. As the people that are teaching these topics, is there more sense checking that needs to take place? Do we need to sort of revisit some of the information that we've interpreted? Are there gaps in the data? So going back to that dissertation point, is it true that not every university requires an undergraduate dissertation? Or are we just missing those modules? And also, where should the focus be for joint module development? And we'd be really keen to hear from lecturers in the room who are keen to be involved, but also their views on where we should direct these efforts best. Thank you for listening.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Kay. Thanks, Kay. And over to Liz.
Thank you, Kate. That was really, really interesting. And I represent Landex today. Landex is an organisation of land-based colleges and universities across the UK. We work really in hand with all of the principals and the ground staff who are teaching what we'd call land-based subjects. That's subjects around animal science, agriculture, environmental topics, things into vets as well. There's some overlap. We have some members who are in the Agricultural Universities Council and some members who are teaching degrees who are not members of that council. And we have predominantly also members who are delivering agriculture in that 14 through 16 and 16 to 18 market. So those young people who are leaving school and planning to study in that way. That was a really interesting piece of work that you did there. In terms of what is taught at further education, I would say syllabus itself is really quite an interesting piece because that's set and defined and that has to be delivered, and that's what's measurable against in further education. So we have a syllabus. And then probably the question for us in terms of quality for agricultural education is what else we can expose students to across the piece in a wider curriculum of learning that enriches their understanding that agriculture isn't one size fits all. And we have to recognise that, I would say, within Landex, we're uniquely positioned. We've got these 39 members. Not all of them have farms, and those that do, those farms are completely different across the country. So we've got some dairy farming, we've got some extensive livestock grazing, we've got organics into baby food, we've got some veg boxes in peri-urban agriculture, we've got some vertical horticultural production going on. What else have we got? We've got beaver projects and restoration work going on at landscape scale. So it really is quite a mixed bag, and it's hard to say that two of these organisations actually look the same. And what our challenge is that the syllabus that must be delivered in that space is very clearly defined to look the same. We're in a period of curriculum reform in further education, so not to bore you too much as an audience, but that really means that what is actually taught in that space is moving from a kind of traditional technical model into a model where everything that will be taught will have been written by employer trailblazer groups. And what's interesting about that is that the product that comes out at the end of the day is the same for apprenticeships as it will be for T-levels. So that's the position moving forward. We understand that a change in government won't mean a change in terms of that reform, so we anticipate that will continue going forward. So I think one of the things that I think from Groundswell is a key takeaway for us is about connectivity and how we're connected around with the audience and what goes into that curriculum and how we can enrich that. And there are several ways people can do that. You can be involved with your local college through hosting either an apprenticeship, having an apprenticeship on training programme. You can take a student for a set amount of industry experience that has to be really high quality industry experience. There's got to be development. They can't be doing the same thing day in, day out kind of thing. We're looking for quality in that. You can come in and teach a masterclass. You can join us on the teaching and learning forum and come and teach part-time. We're open to all of those offers. So I think there's lots of opportunity within further education. But as I say, when we get down to looking at module level, what's taught, less flexibility in that space in particular. You asked as well about what the colleges were doing in terms of kind of transition as we've moved away from sort of common agricultural policy. And I started working for Lannock in 2019. And just to give you a bit of background, I am literally a farmer's daughter from a mixed farm in Lancashire. And I happened to stumble into teaching and fell in love with it a long time ago. And I could recognise what was happening in the agriculture sector. I joined Lannock in 2019 and started to visit some of our colleges. I haven't actually successfully made it to all 39 members yet. We did have COVID in between. And what struck me about these visits is I'm talking to colleges that happen to have farms as part of their offering, and each and every one of those farms seem to be doing something regenerative, sustainable, adapting practice. And one of the things that they were very kind of short on was time and time to network. So one of the things that we've been able to sort of think about and take steps forward to is to bring those farm managers and farm decision makers closer together to sharing some of their common knowledge. Our thinking along this happened accidentally at the time of the Harper Adams School of Sustainable Food and Farming was coming together on the horizon. We fitted nicely in, and I'm really pleased to say Lucy is here today. Lucy? She's who's a facilitator, and we work very closely. We have about 4 meetings a year where really our farm leaders can get together, can share some of that good practice and think about next steps, particularly as most of our colleagues have made commitments towards net zero, and we've got really strong commitments towards our action for climate change. So I think really my key message today is if you're not connected into your local land-based college, I've got my colleague Ian with me. He's over at the back there. He can put you in touch with people locally. And as I say, we're here really to serve the industry, and that's our focus moving forward. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Liz. So now it's open forum, really. I think there's, if you've got questions for Kay or Liz, then fire away. And also any comments on Kay's questions to you as well would be great. So there's a microphone around. So there's a question over there or a comment. Let's see. Thanks.
Hello. My name is Sean Madlone. I'm actually from Ireland. The process of education is slightly different in the sense, but I'm working in that sector. And my honest opinion is, particularly at third level, there's not enough good quality experience at lecturing capability in regenerative agriculture. It's a completely different system. And what you find, I'm sure it's the same here, but that colleges, not at lecture level often, but at accountancy level and finance level, they see opportunities. They will be all, yes, we'll do that, and there's a spare lecture, and he'll be reading regenerative ag out of a book that knowing absolutely nothing. And a prime example actually was one of the earlier studies when they talked about forestry and agroforestry. Well, agroforestry has absolutely nothing to do with forestry. They're completely separate. The same way is we look at regenerative ag, biological agriculture, whatever you want to call it, it's about soil science. It's about that whole area. And I think there's a great opportunity for the regenerative sector to maintain that looseness, that they're not, because I heard it earlier today, you've been trying to focus into the way conventional or organic was, into pigeonhole into certain parameters. Regenerative is a result of those things failing. So I think you have to be very careful, and that knowledge base and that flexibility that happens within the regenerative sector needs to be maintained at farmer level, because you look at the history of education. When England and Ireland are in the EU, those billions spent on education and training, it ended up as PhDs that necessarily never filtered really back down to the agricultural farm. So why should farmers now give all away that intellectual ability so colleges can run courses when that should be maintained much more at a local level? The best example of this being done, I thought, was the innovative farmer model. I thought that was one where farmers are working for farmers. I'm involved in development courses. We have a master's in organic and biological agriculture. So I'm not coming from this from the wrong. We're trying to develop a degree at the moment, and it's an absolute nightmare. Further education is slightly different, that lower level. I think if you can get the good values, the understanding, soil science, what it's about, what's the difference, and understanding that and putting the power back at those farmers at lower level, you can maybe do something at a higher level then. But I would worry about starting at third level.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And with you on innovative farmers, good old work, I set up that. So yeah, shout out for that. But I guess that you talked there about people who don't necessarily know much about it, kind of been given a book to read. I think we also maybe see quite a lot of the opposite, where you've got lecturers who are really passionate about this and deeply knowledgeable, but maybe feeling either because of what they're kind of expected to teach within a particular module, but as much as anything also trying to judge what their audience expects and wants, maybe holding it back a little bit on sharing their knowledge and sort of passion for a topic like regenerative agriculture. I think you see a real mix of these things going on. So any more? Yes, some. Oh, good. Lots. Great. Thanks.
My name's Pete Berry. I'm a research scientist at ADAS. I would describe myself as an applied scientist who's very interested in getting their research used on farm. And my experience is that, as you rightly say, the university courses are very knowledge sort of based and improving knowledge. But I think there needs to be a greater emphasis on improving sort of critical thinking, asking the right questions, working out how to answer those questions, doing tests on farm. Because my experience has been that all farms are different. You need to know the underlying principles that drive soil and plant systems, but then you need to apply those to your farm and your individual circumstances. And being able to work out what questions to ask and how to answer them is really, really important. And I don't think many courses equip us to be able to do that. And I'll give you an example. In the Yield Enhancement Network, for example, we got together some of the farms which sort of achieve the highest yields and asked them, what do you do to do that? And a lot of it wasn't necessarily based on their knowledge; it was their approach. So they were not afraid to ask questions, do tests, have tests that didn't work. We didn't sort of call them failure; they called them just sort of new learnings. They weren't afraid to do that sort of thing. They had a very inquiring mind. They often came from different backgrounds as well, not farming backgrounds, so they had a different sort of approach. And they also had sort of a network of trusted sort of advisors, I suppose. So they knew we couldn't do it all. They knew how to sort of engage with the right people.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks, Pete. And that idea of the critical thinking is really, should be crucial to degrees. That's kind of partly what it's about. I wonder, Liz, in FV presumably as well, there's an element to that.
Yeah, certainly we're looking for I would say in your top end of achieving distinction, you're looking for critical thinking and evidence of that, and using analysis of data and asking those why questions. That's what gets the students the higher grade, in essence. If you are regurgitating then a knowledge-based curriculum, you tend to just be kind of plodding along. And I would recognise the fact that it's great to have classrooms that are mixed, so students from a whole range of backgrounds, because then you get that real diversity of thinking, which prompts greater diversity of thinking in others. And that's, I think, really what we need to see. And I'm pleased to say that I see that quite regularly. Okay.
Thanks. If you pass it that way, thanks, Pete. And then back along the row. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, I'm Alex Gray. I teach agriculture at Brooksby College, land-based FE college. I actually think there's real opportunity to normalise all of the stuff that we see around us at FE colleges, because that's often the first taste of agriculture for students. The new T-level courses are very, very restrictive on what we can and can't teach, but you can kind of hack it slightly. So, for instance, we have a lot of land. The farm doesn't need to make a profit. We make our profit from the learners. So that means we can play about with ideas. So we've got 20 acres of agroforestry, we're mob grazing, we're doing river restoration projects, all that sort of stuff. And then we build projects around that and get the students involved. So we've got the ag engineers have built a mobile livestock shade, welded that together for us. And again, you've got agroforestry, which might not be in the T-level spec, but there's fruit trees, which is in the horticulture spec. You've got trees which are in the forestry one, and then you've got the crops and livestock in between. So you can manage these systems and at the same time expose people to stuff.
Yeah.
So it does work.
Great, thanks. And if you pass the mic along that way as well. Thank you.
Rachel Phillips from the Apricot Centre. We are we're not a college, but we do run FE Ofqual accredited courses in Regen Ag. And the reason why we did that was because there wasn't anything, we didn't want to shoehorn anything into an MVQ or a sitting guilds. And the gaps in the data, we'd be happy to share our modules because they're written with the students of what they wanted to teach on the 20 farms that we work with, of what the farmers wanted them to learn. For me, the focus of a joint module development, I think, should be interfacing. We have many master's students that come down, having done masters in different agricultural levels, that want to put their hands in the soil and learn from a practical kinesthetic point of view. So we would be really interested, but also, for a joint module development, but also interfacing between grassroots small providers like ourselves and those that aren't accredited with what's going on at universities, so that you guys can support us to be able to teach that knowledge.
Great, thanks, great idea. And if you pass the microphone, was there someone just actually right behind you as well first? Did you have your hand up in between? No? Okay. Yeah.
Hello, Mark Edwards. I'm a senior lecturer in environmental science at the University of Northampton. Have you got any plans to roll your stuff out to a wider audience at all? So we teach, while we don't teach agriculture, we teach lots of stuff that's on the fringes of what you're talking about, biodiversity, conservation, and so forth.
So I'll take that one. So with the Agriculture Universities Council, that came together a handful of years ago, and originally was a group of universities that both taught and researched agriculture. So if you had a sort of Venn diagram, it was the bit in the middle. And what we, I think, have realised since is it probably makes sense to have the full, if you like, the full binoculars, because if we're talking about research, it makes sense to work with all those who are focused on research. And if we're talking about anything to do with education, it makes sense to be inclusive on that front too. So in the next few weeks, probably, I think we're going to be inviting lots of other universities to get involved if they want to, and help shape how it all develops. So if we have a chat afterwards, then we'll make sure that we're in touch by that. So thanks very much. Please, could we throw the microphone over that way? Not literally. Thanks.
Hiya, my name's Alice. I'm from Askham Bryan College, so FE level. And I think for us, we're introducing the T level this year, and it's almost, there's a slight panic around the office of simply from what we've got to teach, how we fit it all in, to the point where we're looking at scheduling and trying to avoid T-level lessons on a Monday because there's bank holidays, so we can't fit in all the lessons we need. So then for someone that like me who is passionate about the regenerative side of things, when it doesn't necessarily fit straight into well, it's not modules anymore, but into the syllabus, it's just trying to figure out ways to like trickle feed it into what we're already teaching. very jealous about the college over here whose farm doesn't have to make a profit, because that's one of our biggest limitations with being able to work on the college farm. Our farm is still expected to turn a profit at the end of the year, so there's only so much that the students can have in terms of like experimentation and trying out new designs and stuff. So I think from our end, it's trying to see how we can feed it in, because 16 to 18-year-olds, there's so much, they're like little sponges. So if we can feed it into them at that age, it becomes a lot less daunting when they're in the big wide world or when they're in a higher education.
Great, thanks, Liz. Do you wanna...
Yeah, the T level itself, I think there's some areas where there's some nudges that we need to achieve with it. But I also look at it with the sense of hope. It is not necessarily about a knowledge exchange curriculum anymore. It's quite a holistic learning experience. It requires a more humanist approach. It's about the wider development of that young person so that they're ready for their next steps. I recall talking to a farmer about 2 years ago. Lots of farmers, when we say what's missing from the agricultural curriculum, often tell us things about tractor driving, that kind of thing. And he said leadership, and I think that's really interesting, because this curriculum offers us the opportunity to enable young people to start leading their own agenda with it. And so I think it's about the lens in which we're looking at it. And as agricultural teachers and lecturers, we often look at things in that kind of teach assess way, and this is a much more lived curriculum. So if I give you some of the examples, there is a whole piece on sustainability in which you will be able to weave in, and you must weave it in. You must weave regenerative into that. You must weave in some of the examples as Alex is talking about. Otherwise, it's not meaningful for the students. They can't connect to the reality of actually the lived experience of farming. So that's a real piece of hope, I would say. And it's nice to see things in there as well that I think we take for granted. So there's lots of things about respect for the land. There's a whole section on our kind of approaches to understanding the wider communities that we serve. There's a nice piece in there on modern slavery, understanding workers' rights. So we can see with it that there's a bigger piece than simply a knowledge exchange. And I think it might be about getting together and sharing our learnings as we move forward in this curriculum reform. The groups that we've worked with in terms of preparing for this T-level change have kind of, once they've looked at it through that lens, have realised that actually a lot of it is really about a change in mindset and a change in behaviour, and less about that kind of module delivery. Please do keep talking to us, because we're about success for the students that come through your hands. I appreciate it. It's quite a big change, though.
Great, thanks, Liz. There's a hand right at the back, right back up there. Thank you. Right, so over there. Yeah, thanks. Also, if you're thinking of asking a question, you stick your hands up a little bit in advance. Yeah, so Lisa, others? Okay, great.
Lucy Crockford, Hertfordshire University, a lecturer in soil and water management. I'm really glad you made that point, because it's something that I've been reflecting on quite a bit with regards to what happens when the students leave and they've graduated. It's fantastic that we're talking about trying to integrate regen. I've been trying to teach bits of regen to my first years, kind of, surreptitiously. And I can remember speaking to a placement student. I met his family. We were having this drinks reception thing. And I said, so when so-and-so leaves, what's the plan? And they said, actually, we're retiring. So he's going to have the farm. And I was absolutely flabbergasted, because generally there is that lag time when we have graduates going out who are going home to their home farm. Their father might only be in his late 50s or early 60s. I've known farmers to keep going till they're in their 80s. It could be 20 years before that graduate is actually let do stuff on their farm. And I think my question is, what in agriculture do we do about getting farmers that are long left university to continue their professional development? Because that's the other part of a university, is short courses, developing people. They can choose not to take part in that. They can continue to do their farm exactly as they please. And in pretty much every other sector, there's an expectation for us to continue, if you want to be chartered, if you want to get promotion, etc., to do CPD. But I've worked in a number of catchments There are farmers who literally will not speak to me because I have a more environmental head on me, because they just don't want to know. And I'm just wondering, how do we get graduates to actually influence the next steps, because we're going to teach them really well? And how do we get farmers that have been working for a long time to want to know about these new things and encourage their graduates to also be influencing their farm?
Great, thank you. So 2 things actually. Just for those of you from universities and colleges, if you could just stick your hands up for a minute, great. If you offer, and keep them up, and then if you offer CPD in some shape or other, short courses, that sort of thing, could you keep your hand up? And if you don't, bring them down. Just interested to see how many of you are doing that as well. So fair few, but not everybody by any means. Okay, thanks. And then you also said surreptitiously in first. Like, why surreptitious? I guess is part of the question, right? If there's that microphone gone behind you.
I mean, my module asked me to talk about biodiversity and environmental science for agriculture. And when I first started at Harper 10 years ago, I would teach what I teach. I would get maybe 10 of 140 who would already know what I'm talking about and be interested. There would be a contingency that were actively against what I was talking about, and there'd be the ones who didn't really care. And then as my years have gone on, the proportion that already know and are interested has gone up to about 40 or 50 out of the 140 or so. So I mean that I have to, back in the day, had to be a little bit more kind of agricultural about my environmental as opposed to being environmental about my agriculture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that experience of, in a way, needing to start where your crowd is part of what shapes what what students get, in a way. So in that conversation I mentioned last year with a student, where they're reflecting on not having really had much engagement on regen in a lecture, that's partly, I expect, because the pool of students who they were along with in that lecture maybe had less of an appetite for it for them, and the lecturer is trying to sort of judge that and get things in the right moment, and that's quite a difficult art, I guess. So there's a question in the middle there from Lisa. Thanks. And say if you want to say anything, Kayleigh, as well.
Well, I was just reflecting that some of that is about our pedagogical approaches to teaching, isn't it? And how we create curiosity in students. And I've always found that if we create that curiosity, then we end up with a student that becomes quite confident in thinking and critical thinking and explaining that to other people, and have had students successfully go back and change mindsets on farms around all kinds of small changes, which can then lead to larger changes. So I think sometimes it's about how we're presenting our materials and how we're coming across as lecturers, and we need to think, and I always often reflect, is a lecture really the best way to learn agriculture, or should we really be thinking more about that kind of problem-based learning, real kind of case study piece that's more student-led seminars?
Yeah, great, thanks. So yes, Lisa, and then the microphone goes down here after.
Yeah, so I'm a lecturer at the Royal Agricultural University, but I'm quite new to academia and was in industry, and I wondered how could we better join the dots between those in further education studying land-based courses and higher education, particularly when it comes to like practical skills, because we have quite a disparity in students coming in who come from like A-level training backgrounds, who haven't had the opportunity to do practical skills as much as in further education backgrounds that are land-based. And then you speak to those in the industry and it's hugely variable. You've got some of the farms asking for these leadership skills, but you still have a lot asking for like, can you direct drill? Can you like ride a quad bike safely? Can you like handle cattle?
I'm aiming for both of those. I'll have a leader that can do those. Yeah, you touched on an interesting point. I think that is sometimes down to how we've set UCAS points and how we're interpreting those, and how there is still a legacy that the current technical qualifications that are on offer are deemed not to have parity with A-levels, even though in the UCAS system they do, and you're often getting a technical student who can write an exceedingly good referenced report, but they're reading that they don't quite make it in terms, or they're their next steps is through a foundation year or something like that, and they're being put off. So really it's about looking at access and participation and thinking, how do we open up the doors for the students that are in FE. And I think we also need to take a moment to think about students in FE. A lot of them don't necessarily come from backgrounds that have a tradition of going to university. Certainly I didn't. And it can be quite daunting for them to consider what that means for them financially. And so how do we then open those doors effectively? Quite a few young people who studied with me at degree level did so because economically they couldn't have afforded to have left home and paid for the university experience plus the student fees. So, there are lots and lots of barriers for young people as we look moving forward. And those barriers, I think, are constructed, and we need to look to think, how can we remove them?
Great, thanks. Yep.
Hi, Alice Luthwaite from Riverford Organics. So I'm kind of picking up on Rachel's point in terms of where the employers are in terms of the work you're doing at the universities. I hear that we could become trailblazer organisations in the FE colleges, but how are you bringing the employers into the actual FE work that you're doing?
So briefly, and it'd be good to chat afterwards, so there'll be lots of universities here, but most of the universities have employer forums and various different ways, often focused on conversations about what employers want of their graduates and so on, but also sometimes bridging into conversations about research as well. So I'd say most, all. Is anybody from university that there isn't anything like that at all here? Yeah, I think generally people have some kind of setup like that, and those conversations are really important. I guess one of the issues when you're someone like Riverford, you're sort of national and local, is if you're wanting to have those conversations with everybody, there are a lot of different people to have it with, and so part of what one of the things with this group of universities we might be able to do, we've got a forum as well, a stakeholder forum, not focused specifically on that issue, but it's just a chance for people who want to engage with lots of universities at once to have one conversation with all of them, rather than have to go around and see them all separately. So, and that's slightly different focus, because it doesn't get into the nuts and bolts of employer expectations, but hopefully a step in the right direction. So microphone next over there, and then next over there, and then at the back, please. Thanks very much. Thank you. And Ken, there's anything on that front? I know in FE you've got tons of that.
We do. So we have advisory panels on colleges at college level. I talked a little bit about opportunities to co-teaching. Current policy is co-designed, co-delivered with a strong and seamless industry relationship between educators and the industry or the sector, I would probably describe it. So there is that opportunity, and we at Landex also have we work quite closely with the national land-based colleges. So if you want that one conversation to hit many colleges, or all our colleges in fact, then that's really a one-stop shop, and Ian can help with that.
And can I just say as well, we've got not that much time left, so if we make these questions and comments quite speedy.
Thank you, John. I will be brief. My name is William Hudson. I'm a part-time lecturer at Writtle, and I talk about horticulture, but I also talk about regenerative agriculture. We have a regenerative agriculture degree. I just wanted to make a point. Sorry, it's sort of 2 points back. We work very hard to integrate agriculture into education, not the other way around. We've started a farmers club. We have 4 conferences a year, and we also have farm teams. So when you start your course, you are given a farm to be with for the next 3 years. And that farm, you will negotiate with that farm what work you're going to do. It could be research, it could be just driving a tractor, but it is an engagement. And we've found that we've become very far removed from what farmers actually expect of the education that students are actually getting. So I think possibly, and I'm being presumptuous, it's a message to everybody really, get the farmers back into your doors and get the students out on the farms, not just for a project, but get them there, get them dirty, get them cold.
Great, thanks William. So there was, in fact, no, like a cluster of questions over there, points. So if there was the guy nearest the front there, if you stick your hand back up again. Yep. You were there first, and then if we quickly run through you lot, then there was someone right at the back, I think, as well. Oh yeah, there you are, in the hat. Thanks.
Thank you. Dan Evans, lecturer in soil science at Cranfield University, also course director for a new soil science apprenticeship that we're releasing later this year. The seeds of that apprenticeship were sown a couple of years ago when industry came to us to put in a new standard for a course. And I think that perhaps relates to some of the things discussed here, in the sense that how do we know what we're teaching is relevant? Well, it's the industry telling us as a university what they'd like to see in a course. But I think there's something else that comes with the development of an apprenticeship, is that co-design between industry and the university. The other thing I'd mention is that we talked about mindsets and leadership qualities, some of those transferable skills. When you put an apprenticeship together, there's a very long list of things that you have to cover, knowledge and skills, and of course in soil science there's a lot to be covered. But a third of that list are what called behaviours, and these are mindsets that anyone working, in this case within soil science, will need to have going into the industry later on. So these mindsets, these leadership qualities are always embedded into the development of our modules, and I think that's one of the better aspects of an apprenticeship over maybe a typical degree.
Brilliant, thanks. So we've got, I think, 3 final quick-fire, very quick-fire things. So yes, is that
Thanks,
okay?
Tom. Nicola Randall from Harper Adams. I manage our agroecology MSc. I just wanted to say a couple of things very quickly. One is around shared modules, which I think is a fantastic idea. But I also think it's very important that we actually are distinct, both in course titles and in course content, because that gives potential students the ability to choose where they want to go, rather than to go, every university offering the same thing. So, for example, on our agroecology, most of our students have come from industry or they're retraining or coming from different backgrounds, rather than perhaps an undergrad. And our undergrad courses offer placements, which gives that farm engagement, for a year. And I can't remember my other points, so I'll leave it. But
Great,
thank you.
Thanks. And then just next to you, thanks.
Yeah, hi, Julia Casper at Harper Adams University as well. It's a bit of a cluster of us here. Just quickly regarding CPD, there are routes for CPD for agricultural students that have graduated. The School of Sustainable Food and Farming at Harper Adams is a fantastic young farmers program. So the first cohort has just gone through, second cohort is coming through, and there's going to be a big regen focus. So Simon Thirlwell is around, and there's a stand, so go and find out more about that if you're interested. The other thing is Nuffield Scholars. There's the scholarship route, plus also the Farmers Charitable Trust, and I'm sure there are probably others. I'm not an agricultural lecturer, by the way. I'm an ecologist, but yeah, lots of opportunities.
Great, thanks. And final point at the back. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll try and keep it quick. Agricultural schools and universities are, of course, for an important part dependent on funding from the industry for the research, and that dictates to an extent as well what kind of research is done and what kind of topics are taught. I can imagine that's also a challenge for schools and universities to navigate that if you want to include more regenerative knowledge in your curriculums. This morning, Peter Bick in his talk gave some examples of resistance in the industry against sort of more regenerative systems. Can you explain a little bit from your experience how these institutes can navigate that challenge?
Thanks. And I don't know if Kayleigh, Liz, you wanted to say anything on that? I mean, my sense, having worked outside in the NGO sector at the Soil Association, and then coming to, I guess, having that idea, and then coming to work in university is kind of that's not a big driver in a way. There's some sort of structural inertia in terms of what gets taught, perhaps, but this idea that it's driven by relationships with big corporates selling pesticides, and that's kind of driving the educational agenda, I think is not. It doesn't feel like a big part of what's going on, and what explains the sort of educational experience and what people are getting taught. But I don't know if anybody else wants to pipe up quickly and offer a different view, or either of Kayleigh or Liz. I think we need to wrap up in a very quick moment.
Yeah, when we're approached this week, when we're approached, it's usually around funding that's coming through for, this week's example was nature-based solutions through money from DEFRA, less from industry and more around money that comes through kind of Research England and those kind of priorities. So less really from kind of that industry. I think they probably have their own sort of research arms in general. That's my particular point on it.
Okay. Fantastic. So thanks everybody for joining in the discussion, and especially, so before I do thank yous actually, what's going to happen next is, like I say, quick switch from lecture, theatre to party tent, which will involve those of you who want to help out with that, basically taking the back, Lisa, if you stick your hand up, maybe actually to where Pete was, Pete Berry, a couple of rows in front of you, those back chairs, we'll stack them up to the side somewhere and clear that space. So grab a chair if you fancy that and put it somewhere sensible over to the side, and then Kate, who is there, will help people from all the different universities who've got banners and things, put them in sensible places, and that will be our very quick turnaround. And then it is drinks at the back. And there is beer from Stroud Brewery, and then there is cider and juice from Pershore Press, which is part of Pershore College, which is
Warwickshire College Group, but I can't name one of the. There's so many of them producing all sorts. Plumpton's wine springs to mind. There's all kinds out there. We're very busy in Lannock.
So we chose the cider, and so that's there as well. And just go to the back, grab a drink, stick around. But first, some thank yous. So to Kay for a huge amount of work that she's done on the module mapping, which is super helpful. And I think it'd be great to have more conversation around that with those of you who are sticking around, about particularly this question of where we put the effort on the shared module development. Liz, for that overview from FE, and it is a different world from universities in terms of how it all works and the opportunities to shape it. Aurora Trust for funding the work and making this all possible, and for paying for lots of lecturers to be here from all around the place who wouldn't otherwise come to Groundswell, so that's absolutely fantastic. And also to the Elizabeth Creek Charitable Trust, who fund a lot of the background work on the Agricultural Universities Council, to Agricology for teaming up and hosting this big tent, and to Kate and to Matt, who have helped set it all up and organise it, and of course to Groundswell for having us. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.